Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be going over the 5 biggest lies we are taught when we're learning guitar. Yes, lies. I know that's a bit of a flippant way to go about approaching a lesson, but these are things that are always brought up in my one-on-one lessons as things that kind of end up feeling like a trap for people. So I'm going to go over these 5 different things and attempt to give you remedies for them. They're things that I've thought long and hard about and are things that I kind of always think about as I'm on my journey of playing guitar, because I'm right there with y'all trying to, become the guitar player that I dream of, and I want to help y'all become the guitar player y'all dream of being. But I think avoiding these 5 kind of trains of thought will help y'all get there sooner. Okay, so the first lie is that the pentatonic scale is everything. The pentatonic scale is typically the first scale we learn when we're starting to play guitar, because it allows us to kind of jump in immediately and play over backing tracks, play over blues, etc. And if we're in A minor, that scale goes like this. Alright, so I'm sure most of y'all are familiar with that scale, that shape. The thing with that is when we kind of start using it and jamming over tracks, it can kind of become the only scale we know. And the issue with pentatonic for me is that it only utilizes 5 notes when there's 7 notes in a natural minor scale. And those 2 notes that we're excising to get from 7 to 5 are the 2 half-step intervals in the scale. And there's two big problems with this. It's hard to count with the pick in your hand. So the first thing is, in a 7-note scale, we have 7 chords. Makes sense. 7 root notes, 7 chords. And it just goes from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when we take away those 2 half steps, we basically can't play optimally over a lot of those chords. For example, if we have a pentatonic scale, we can optimally play over an A minor. But for example, we cannot optimally play over a 4 chord, which would be D minor, because it has an F in there, and that's not part of our pentatonic scale. And likewise, we can also not optimally play over a 6 chord, which is an F major 7, because we need the F in there. And we can also not optimally play over the 2 chord, which is a B minor 7 flat 5 or B diminished. And for example, if you wanted an E7 dominant turnaround, we don't have the leading tone in there, so we can't optimally play over that, because that's outside of the scale. So I think the best way to actually learn scales is how pianists learn when they're starting out. I started out learning the piano, and the first thing I ever learned was the C major scale. All white notes, no flats, no sharps. The major scale is the core of what music theory should be taught from. It's what all children's songs are based off of. It's what we learn in choir, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And I think it's just the easiest scale to get your head around, because it's just everywhere. So the major scale in C is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And that's all across the neck. I won't necessarily go into detail about all those, scale positions, because you can find them readily on the internet in detail. There's like millions of diagrams of this scale. But the best way to go about learning scales is learn all of the major scale, and then derive the minor scale from that. The minor scale is built from the 6th degree of the major scale. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's our A. And if we start on A but play our C major notes, we now have our full natural minor scale, and that's how you get, all these types of licks. So that's utilizing all the minor notes, and you can create much more interesting textures and sounds and resolves and everything, because you basically have the full toolkit for most Western music. And therein, in your A minor scale, like I said, you're playing the C major scale as well. They're all the same notes. So C major is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And A just starts on the 6th of that. So it's C, D, E, F, G, A. And so if we're starting A minor, A, B, C, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so forth. Just keeps repeating up the octaves. So technically, you could start way down here if the neck would allow it and keep going way up here, because the notes are just a continuum, and the guitar gives us access to certain ones of them, but there's no real boxes or anything like that. Boxes are kind of like a guitar construct, and we want to be playing music, not boxes. The other issue I find that comes with learning the pentatonic scale and sticking to that is it encourages us to stick to this stepwise, even pick motion, up, down, just stepwise movement. Stuff like that, and it can make our solos kind of sound like this. As opposed to this. So what I'm doing in that second solo to make it sound more interesting brings me to the second guitar lie, which is pick direction. The pick direction you choose actually has a big impact on the expressiveness of your playing. For example, here's a clip of John Mayer playing his song Changing live. So what do I see when I watch this video? Well, I'm seeing that he's using a lot of upstrokes, and this is something I kind of discovered a couple years ago and started implementing it into my own playing, because I was finding myself unable to replicate John Mayer's sound, and I was really curious as to why, and then it kind of clicked for me. A lot of times when I see him playing, he's doing a lot of upstrokes. So instead of the down-up picking mindset, a lot of the times John Mayer has an up-down picking mindset, and it totally changes things. So one thing it does is upstrokes just naturally have a bit of a more gentle and vocal sound to them. It's very subtle, but it's something that I started to notice greatly when I started transitioning to up-down picking. And the second thing it does is when we kind of have more of a, singular direction pick mindset, instead of up, down, alternating all the time, we can kind of create more interesting rhythm. So if I had a lick, like a blues lick, and I was thinking alternate picking, I'd probably do. It kind of puts me in a more straight, even way of thinking. Whereas if I were to approach it as more unidirectional with up picks being my main pick direction, it would give me something more like this. Can you hear how it's kind of forcing me to be more rhythmic? Because I don't have that second pick motion to fall back to. So I kind of have to utilize the pick motions that I do have, which are mainly ups, and kind of make use of my hammer-ons, pull-offs, and it just makes it more like da 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 instead of like da 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 da. And I, in many cases, especially in like more, slow bluesy, jazzy settings, that's very nice because it makes it very vocal, because vocalists naturally think more rhythmic, more melodic, more about the push and pull of the rhythm, and guitarists can sometimes overlook that. And so I encourage you to really think about your pick direction. On the other hand, here's a clip of Josh Smith playing a blues, and notice how he's using primarily downstrokes with the occasional upstroke. This just creates a whole different vibe. He has a lot of. So this has a similar effect as prioritizing upstrokes, as it's still a unidirectional way of thinking, and it makes us be more rhythmically interesting. But the downstrokes themselves have a little bit more of a commanding sound and more of an intensity that the upstrokes don't. So for example, here's a passage with downstrokes. And the same thing with upstrokes would be like this. So notice how when I was prioritizing upstrokes, it had more of a plucky bird-like quality, and it just has a more gentle approach. And these are just tools to have in your toolkit, because you can choose when you want to prioritize upstrokes, choose when you want to prioritize downstrokes, and when you want to mesh the two and do more alternate picking. For example, that clip of John Mayer playing Changing, that was kind of early on in the solo. And he's doing a lot of upstrokes because it's kind of a more gentle, mellow part of the song. But when it gets more intense, he switches to more of a downstroke approach. So that's a huge one. I think pick direction is something that's very often overlooked, but it really does make a world of difference. And when we become intentional about how we're approaching it, it can open up a whole nother world for us. And it's just another thing that we can have, control over, and something that we can be intentional with, because you can only really be intentional with your playing if you have all these things under your control and you're consciously choosing to do this, for example, choosing to do upstrokes, choosing to do downstrokes. So I touched on this a bit earlier, but lie number 3 is that rhythm and lead are separate. Rhythm and lead are not separate, and in fact, they could not be more related, because in theory, a chord is happening and you want to outline that chord. And chords are typically seen as rhythm, and then lead is like individual notes, like the soloist or singer. But we want to be able to articulate, express ideas based on the chord that's happening underneath. In the backing band or with the backing track, however you're playing.
He stopped me, and I said, "What?" And he goes, "What'd you just do when you played rhythm?" "Yeah, play that in your solo."
So I kind of touched on this earlier with the, having the entire scale at your disposal. And then the next thing is just becoming aware of what notes are actually in the chords that are being played. For example, if we have a passage like D minor 7, E7, and A minor. we look at what are the notes happening in each of those chords. Well, D minor is D, F, and A. E7 is E, B, G sharp, and D. And then A minor is A, C, and E. But this whole progression is in the key of A minor, since all three of these chords belong to A minor. The one kind of outlier is E7, but it is just a transition chord to create tension because it's taking an E minor 7 and taking the third up 1/2 step, and going up 1/2 step on that particular note gives us the leading tone to the key of A minor. So we have G sharp and A. And that just creates a stronger resolve, and it's very much a stylistic thing. But if we're going to play over those chords, over the D minor, we can play. See how I'm pretty much arpeggiating that chord with some stepwise movement from the key of A minor, but you can kind of see how that melody falls with the chord. Then E7. Really just hitting the notes from that chord. E, G sharp, and D. Then E again, and then A minor. And that's how we create great melodies, is by following the chords and resolving with the chords or not resolving with the chords. That's another thing, but it's all about being able to have control over all these aspects of our playing, like I said. And the other aspect of rhythm that should be present in our lead playing is the time feel, where notes are placed on the beat. For example, let's take a look at this clip of George Benson playing his song Affirmation. So his lead playing is a shining example of having amazing time feel in your lead playing. He makes this melodic motif almost into a rhythm part. That's just packed with rhythmic feel. And he literally is playing some comping stuff with the... But aside from that, his lead parts are just so rhythmically interesting, and it just keeps the ears really hooked on it. If those, if that note is put like right on the beat or just, right behind the beat, depending on the feel you want to evoke, like a lot of R&B jazz, smooth jazz stuff like George Benson, he can really benefit from putting stuff behind the beat. But varying where we put notes in relation to the beat can be another aspect of our playing that we keep dynamic, because for a little bit, you can put notes right on the beat. For a little bit, you can put them behind. You can even rush it a little bit, which is not something that I typically like, but it works in some cases. But rhythm is everything. Even in lead, harmony, all of that, rhythm is the glue between everything. So the fourth lie that we come face to face with as guitarists is that modes are complicated. And I always thought modes were complicated up until very recently. But all modes is a way of telling us what diatonic key are all these chords from. So for example, let's look at John Mayer playing his song, If I Ever Get Around to Living. So the chords that are happening under the solo are G major and D minor 7. So pretty much G to D minor, G to D minor. And if we were to try and play G over that, as you know, we typically like see like what's the first chord in the progression and we'll just play in that key. If we tried to play G over that, we'd run into some issues because that note, the F sharp, would rub very terribly against the D minor 7. Because we have an F, but the key of G has an F sharp. So we kind of have to do one more layer of investigating before we start playing lead over this. We have to figure out what key has both of these chords, the G and the D minor, contained within it. And that key we will find is C, because C has C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, which is, yeah, and then C. So in that we have, when we were going through those chords, we had G and D minor. So both of those chords belong to the key of C. But since the progression starts on a G, we have to name it differently because we want to tell people that the progression starts on a G, but it's using notes from C major. And so how we do that is we have to give it a mode name. So there's 7 modes because there's 7 notes in a major scale. And since G is the 5th of C, F is the 4, G is the 5th. Since G is the 5th of C, we give it the name of the 5th mode. So modes go 1, Ionian, that's just major. 2 is Dorian, so that would be playing off the 2 chord. 3 is Phrygian. 4 is Lydian. 5 is Mixolydian. So this progression is in G Mixolydian. And that's just a very overly complicated way of saying this song is in the key of C, but the first chord in the progression is the 5th of C. It's Mixolydian because the first chord is the 5th of C, and that 5th is G. So this song, if I ever get around to living, is in G Mixolydian. So we play all C major notes over that, just like John Mayer was in that clip. He was up here doing all C. And then he came down here. And he even hit a C triad at one point, or I guess it's more of a 2 notes from the triad, but it was up here. So he's perfectly showing in this clip that it's in G Mixolydian. And yeah, there's many more songs where that's present. Even if we look at like the Interstellar theme, which is one of my favorite theme songs ever. It goes F major 7, G, but it's kind of like a G with a 6th in there because we have this E ringing out. Then we go A minor, G. So at face value, if we saw that progression, we might think F because the first chord is F. But we have to think, what key are all these notes in? And that key is C. All notes of the key of C. So since F is the 4th of C and F is our first chord, F is the 4th of C, which means we name it based on the 4th mode, which is Lydian. So Interstellar is in the Lydian mode, and that makes sense because Lydian just has this sound. It has this very open, big open sky thing, which just works so well for the movie. So the 5th lie, and I guess it's not so much a lie, but as a habit that we fall into as guitarists, is learning from tutorials rather than learning from the actual guitarists themselves. For example, learning Comfortably Numb from a tutorial of Comfortably Numb versus the actual recording of Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd, or some video of David Gilmour actually playing it. This is something I did for a long time, learning from tutorials, because I couldn't really figure out what was going on if I didn't have someone break it down. But when I started actually trying to just use my ear to learn things and watching videos of the actual, guitarist playing that song, two things would happen. My ear became a lot better, and secondly, I discovered that a lot of the tutorials were wrong. And it kind of makes sense. It would be kind of like trying to learn movie making from watching like a student recreation of The Godfather, as opposed to watching The Godfather and learning from Francis Ford Coppola himself, who's a master filmmaker. So the less levels of separation we can have from what we're trying to learn, the better. Because if something really strikes you from a certain artist, for example, a BB King song, you'd want to learn from BB King because you'll learn the techniques he's using to evoke that emotion. Whereas some of that might get lost in translation in a tutorial. So I'm a huge proponent of learning from the horse's mouth, as they say, which is kind of a funny expression. But it's really true. The best way we can learn is by making our ears, get used to learning things, because it's like a language. You get used to hearing certain words, and then you can identify it. And then, at first, if you hear like a flurry of words, you have no idea what's going on. But then you can start hearing a flurry of words and really know what's going on, because you're forcing your ear and your brain to catch up. And the things we learn slowly are the things we'll retain. So learning, very quickly from a tab or a tutorial, we'll learn those notes, but we're not really properly learning to implement them and connect them back to the knowledge of scales and chords we have. So we're not really learning, we're kind of copying. And we want to learn. So the slow burn is often, what suits us the best and serves us the best. And it's difficult at first, but I promise you'll thank yourself a million times over for having, put in that work for your ear. Because at the end of the day, we're not really guitarists, we're musicians. And as musicians, our greatest tool is our ear. So that thing has got to be developed. It's like hitting the gym with your ear. And the great thing is on YouTube, there's a slowdown feature. So you can play a video at like 75% speed, 50% speed, 25% speed. 25% speed kind of starts getting just comical because there's not really much you can do with that. But 50%, 75% are great ways to learn. And I'm always learning stuff by, pulling up like a Wes Montgomery clip or a Tommy Emmanuel clip. These great players, or George Benson, who plays like 1,000,000 miles per minute. And I have to slow it down to figure out what's going on. But then, once you slow down and get all the notes, then you connect it. What scale is this in? All that. Connect it to your greater knowledge of guitar. And then by doing that, you've really learned something, and you can apply it in all, avenues of your playing, not just that song. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. These are just 5 things that I think are useful tools that we can keep in mind when learning the guitar. And, nothing I say is necessarily correct or the right way. It's just kind of how I think about things. But like I said, the best way to learn is just by learning from the guitarists and the musicians that move you individually. So please like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And everyone have a great day and a Happy New Year.